my absolute pleasure to host this conversation today, which is kind of almost a reprise of a last conversation we had last year with both Simon and Deena on the call, talking about the sort of the business of business in the sort of COVID kind of era. We are not past COVID, as we were just speaking about this very minute, but we have had some insights, and I'm going to be asking the panel members what have their learnings been over the last year, and the kinds of things they're expecting for the next few years. However, first of all, I will introduce myself, which my name is Felicity Lawrence, and I program manage the strategic supply chain and the strategic people C-suite programs and co-design customized learning experiences with various clients that we have with executive education. My colleague, Dave Evers, is also on the call, and Dave is program managing the CIO program, among other things, and will help anybody who needs some assistance on the call if you need it. So I'm sure that you've all done stacks of different kinds of Zoom calls over the last year, but just in case you do need some assistance, please just on chat, talk to Dave. Okay, I think everybody's muted, so that's fantastic. We'll mute while somebody is speaking. And if you would like to add any questions, which I do hope that you have some questions for our panel members, please put them on the chat function. I'll field these and moderate the proceedings, and we'll see where it goes. The structure for today is that I will ask each speaker to speak for about 5 minutes about what's happening in their business and what's happening for them as leaders of their businesses. I'll introduce them in a moment. And also about their growth as leaders over this past year. I'll also then go on to asking them some sort of pithy questions about their reflections on their leadership, also about professional development and what they think about professional development and how important it is, and also advice for people, I assume many of you are, people who want to move into more strategic roles and are on the trajectory, if you'd like to be, to the C-suite, which means executive roles, chief roles. I know that there's a lot of people who don't actually really know what's the C-suite actually is, and I think we should change the name, but anyway, that's what it means, the chief roles. Okay, as I said, please, if you've got any questions, please put them on the chat, and we'll finish at 2 p.m. And it is my pleasure right this very minute to introduce you to the panel. Going through the alphabet, we'll start with Deena, Deena Clarkson, who is currently Program Director for the Global Supply Chain Distribution Centre project. Is that right? Is that what that an acronym actually means, Deena?
So my title is Program Director for Automation for Global Supply Chain. So establishing a lights out automated DC in New Zealand, which will be one of the largest, if not the largest. So moved out of the DC role earlier this year and now in a digital automated role.
Marvellous. I was just about to say that. Thank you. She is core member of the Supply Chain Advisory Group, founding member of the Women in Supply Chain Initiative, plus a mentor, speaker and panel member on the supply chain program. Barbara Harrison is Chief People Officer at GUD Holdings, a portfolio company that operates across New Zealand and Australia. Prior to that, Barbara was Group Manager People and Capability at the New Zealand Transport Agency, GM Business Support at North Power, and HR Manager of Ford Motor Company, etc. Barbara is my Program Strategic People Advisory Group member and is my Program Director for that program, as well as being a mentor and speaker. She divides her time between Melbourne and Auckland and seems very, very good at big, heavy equipment. But she's in New Zealand right this very minute because she can't get to, to Melbourne. Simon Kennedy, lovely, thank you for joining us, Simon, is CDO at Foodstuffs and has been so for the last couple of years. Before that, He was CIO at Air New Zealand, and before that, group CIO at the Warehouse Group. I didn't know this. You've got an MA in Modern History and Economics from the University of Oxford, Simon. Most impressive. And is a very active member, but you talk about that, is a very active member of the CIO Advisory Group and mentor for the C-Suite program participants. Our final speaker is Jay Patel. Jay is Head of Finance at Fidelity Life Assurance Company. Jay has been at Fidelity Life for about 4 years. And before that, Senior Manager at EY, Tower Insurance, and other companies in the UK. I think you're very special, Jay, because you have a passion for tax. Yes, tax accounting. We love that you do have that, because those of us who don't, very deeply appreciative. Jay is an alum of the CFO program, having completed the program just last year. I'll be asking Jay a little bit later how he found the CFO program, how it helped you to shift your perspective from the intricacies of tax accounting to leading more strategically at the organisational level. So thank you, welcome to our panel members, and welcome to everybody on the call today. It's wonderful to see you all with us. Now, okay, I'm going to start with you, Deena. Could you please talk with us about what you've experienced in the last year or so in terms of the Fonterra business, the kind of challenges that you faced, and the kind of things that have emerged through those challenges that you know will continue over and become bigger over the next couple of years or the next 2 or 3 years?
Thanks, Felicity, and welcome to everyone on the call. Last year, I attended a similar webinar and spoke about some of the challenges right in the midst of COVID disruption. It would be fair to say that this is now our new norm for Fonterra, and particularly the impact globally that we're experiencing around ocean freight and our customer demand profile. So as an organisation, we spend an enormous amount of time talking about our business continuity and preparedness, because for many that do interact with supply chains and organisations, there is a very limited and constrained availability of container supply right now, which is having a big impact around our ability to move product and particularly food around the world. The disruption, look, in the scale of Fonterra sense, we believe we have seen the peak of the disruption. And we're in a very privileged position because we have a strong collaboration with Kotahi, our ocean freight provider that works very closely in partnership with Maersk. So we have had the ability to leverage that relationship through our global networks, which has proven to be incredibly valuable by virtue of the capacity we needed on a lot of vessels and ocean freight that just simply weren't coming to New Zealand. Many of you will be aware of the disruption going on through the America-China regions. Imports and all the cash that Mr. Biden is throwing around the world has had a big bearing on container availability, let alone where vessels are prepared to ship. And so we have prepared ourselves in a way which buffers a lot of that, and some of that has been the advantage of our scale and how we position ourselves in New Zealand from an exporting point of view. And that has had a domino effect through some of the supply chain organisations that are either small to medium size in New Zealand as well. So it has been an interesting 12, 18 months. We now see this as the norm. In fact, I've been in meetings today talking with teams about what are the things that are likely to cause pain points in the next 12 months. And there is some discussion about whether it swings completely the other way. Once the world gets through vaccinations and we start to see a little bit of stability around people being out and about, tourism re-establishing, and organisations moving back to what is considered the new norm. So we are also preparing for a swing the other way.
Deena, have you seen differences in the way customers actually buy, whether at a national level or a sort of global level?
Yeah, globally, when we were in the midst of COVID V1, I'll call it, back in March, April, we saw an enormously big swing to food service and food service home delivery in some regions, because people weren't shopping retail because they simply weren't able to. They were locked up at home or being prepared to be locked up. And so a lot of home delivery, in our world, Uber Eats. So that for us meant that we had to be very, very agile in responding to product mix. We saw big swings in demand around cheese and mozzarella and those things that tend to be provided in pizzas and home deliveries, as opposed to restaurants needing ingredients for preparing food within their table service, as an example. And for an organisation like Fonterra, things can be agile at times, but also the dynamics of, we can't just whip up some whole milk powder or whip up some cheese because of the nature of how that product's made and manufactured. So it's been a really, really dynamic year for us to respond to some of those global demands.
Fantastic. Thanks, Deena. I'll come back to you in a little minute. I think we'll stay with the food theme, Simon.
Sure.
And being part of Foodstuffs, I figure that you've probably got quite a lot to say about what you see as trends and how the year has actually progressed.
Yeah. Thanks, Felicity, and afternoon, everyone. Really good to be with you for a little while. Look, I think most people on the call will know Foodstuffs reasonably well, but just as a reminder, our 3 retail banners, around 45 pack and saves, around 100 New Worlds, and sort of 230 odd Foursquares. And then we've also got our Gilmore's wholesale business as well. So, we're across, all of that grocery distribution. I think, the disruption we've faced through 2020 and now, as it sort of continues into 2021, it's been in some ways, not dissimilar to Deena's experience from Fonterra, but different from what a lot of organizations have faced, in that, for us, the challenges, have been against a backdrop of being privileged to be able to trade throughout. And most of the challenge has been about how do we, scale up while through those initial lockdown periods, while also, having to pretty much invent almost overnight, how to keep our customers safe and our team safe in a sort of distanced, supermarket type environment. So a sort of super busy time, but also a time of sort of increased demand. So a sort of different story to obviously what a lot of businesses have had to face. So now where we find ourselves is there have been some changes to kind of consumer behavior and patterns. There is that kind of there's sort of the increase overall, even though obviously through the initial kind of lockdown periods, eating out wasn't even an option. Coming out of those periods, the increase in sort of food service, the increase in the eating out of home or delivered at home has sort of settled in. A huge increase, understandingly, in delivery through those initial lockdowns, and a lot of that has come back off as customers have got comfortable again that it's sort of safe to return to stores, and that still offers a good experience and the right experience for many people. But we've got now this sort of challenging situation is we've got to be alert to the possibility of there might be new waves. They could be coming through, but we're also in a sort of a steady state where we've got a kind of massively disrupted history now. Last year's sales are in no way typical, and we're an industry that sort of traditionally really relies on those kinds of year-on-year patterns, last year comparisons, in order to drive the efficiencies that we need to have to keep the costs down. So being able to have that predictability of demand and predictability of supply is a key determinant of being able to sort of deliver with efficiency. So that's been quite an adjustment for us, and the supply situation and linking into what Deena was describing is a sort of a key watch out for us going forward. I think in many ways, though, the challenges we've got now are kind of the same challenges we had before and during. Really, it's how do we best use all of the resources we've got to find that balance, which is a scale, as a scale business and a sort of leading incumbent in the market. We don't get to choose between running the business today and building the business for tomorrow. We have to be doing both of those, at scale all the time. We've got, we've got emerging competitors. We've got a very capable main competitor who's on their own improvement journey as well. So we've just got to find that clarity of purpose, really clear understanding of priorities and the outcomes we're trying to drive for our customers, and get the right resources around the right things, and make those hard choices in terms of what we're not going to be doing as well. So in many ways, that was true before, it was true during, and it's true now. The lens we kind of look through is we have our overall kind of customer driven strategy, and that's about being clear that we will align everything we have in our business around being driven by customers, and that means choosing not to be driven by other things. And then how that plays out is really using some well-defined customer promises we have in each of those 4 banners, and thinking about how do we get each part of the business to sort of line up behind delivering those promises. So that's the sort of framework we're using.
Fantastic. That's really interesting, Simon. I think that's why I was going to steer away from COVID, but it's not gone anywhere. So I thought, actually, let's stay with that because everybody's still thinking about it. Barbara, you're not exactly in the food business, or you weren't the last time I spoke to you, but then again, you've done so many M&As, I've probably lost touch. You are in the equipment business, and equipment for houses and machinery and this, that, and the other thing. So tell us about your story. What's happened for you in the last, in your business in the last year or so?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Felicity, and good afternoon, everyone. It's lovely to be with you. I'm supposed to actually, as we speak, be in Melbourne. Very grateful that I'm not, that I'm in New Zealand, where we have had, a great degree of good luck and good fortune over the last year. GUD is a really fascinating business in that we're a holding company. And so we have got 14 different businesses that sit within the portfolio. They're predominantly in the automotive aftermarket space, although we have one in the water space, a business called Davey Water Pumps that some of you might have heard of. We've had a really interesting last year. Like Simon was talking about, the core of the business has remained. We've needed to run our business, and as a consequence have taken very purposefully an offensive and a defensive approach to business over the last year. We set out at the beginning of COVID to embark on the journey that we knew we were about to begin purposefully, in a way that was very mindful of certain principles that we held dear as we went through that process, and in a way that attempted to ensure that we used every offensive opportunity that we possibly could in terms of strengthening our business. And so for us, as Felicity's alluded to, that's meant that we have done a number of mergers. We have acquired some businesses. That's been a different process, given that through that time we couldn't travel. And so one of the businesses, for example, was here in New Zealand. Normally our CFO would be intimately involved in that process. Instead, he was using me via remote control. So I think that process actually worked quite well as a consequence of having a resident Kiwi. So we, like the former 2 speakers, have had issue with supply chain, with supply, with making sure that we can get enough of the products that we sell. We've also had this significant uptick in people buying our products because they are based at home. We sell lighting products, as an example, that are fitted on caravans and mobile homes. And as we know, people are spending a lot of money on those sorts of things at the moment. And so we've been very busy, and for us, it's been a very, very successful year that we've needed to navigate, and gladly navigate, whilst also making sure that we take care of our people and the community that exists within GUD. So challenges are pretty much the same as the last 2 speakers in terms of the overall environment. But on top of that, and one that I perhaps might touch on a little bit more, the people constraint is really beginning to be felt. So just as Deena talked about supply chain constraints and product, my business is people. And for those of us on the call that are people, this last year has been a fantastic opportunity for us to actually contribute to the businesses that we're a part of and to show, the true benefit of people. But it's also brought to the fore everything that people, complexities mean within a business. And one that I'm keen to touch on through this conversation is certainly the war for talent. And I think we are just seeing that starting to hot up. So for me, people constraint and making sure that we can get enough of the sort of people that we need to fuel the growth of our business as we progress over these next couple of years is a real key challenge. Sorry, Felicity, I'm rambling at you, so I'll stop there. And
Not at all rambling. In fact, it raises, as you thought, some really interesting issues that we can explore. I think we may not get time to explore them in the extent, but that's okay, because basically people then can come to the programs and explore it in great detail, can't they?
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. It is really interesting, the different kinds of companies that exist that have done really well. It's just been such a startling, probably understandable when you look back, but not certainly looking forward. Jay, I can imagine you're thinking of the tax implications of all of those different businesses. But you're in assurance, you're in Fidelity Life. So yep. What's been your experience and that Fidelity Life's experience with, over the last year or so?
So I guess, as the name suggests, we deal primarily in life insurance, although we also offer income protection, trauma, and total and permanent disability cover. So like everyone else, COVID has obviously been a big challenge for us. I know when it first hit, there was a big concern about how it would impact, our premiums and lapse rates. We thought, as people lost their jobs or their income took a hit, they may choose to cancel their policies. And then obviously there was concern around claims as well, just what a pandemic would do to, the public health system and people's livelihoods. Fortunately, New Zealand's managed it quite well. So we haven't actually had as big of an impact as we expected. We've actually seen income protection lapse rates actually be a lot less than we were expecting, because people were concerned about losing their jobs, so they wanted to hold on to their IP cover. And actually what we've also seen is, when there is a pandemic, people start thinking about their mortality. So people want to hold on to their life insurance as well. And it's quite funny because that's similar to what we saw during the global financial crisis as well. Whenever there's a big shock, people start thinking about their mortality and, looking after their families. So there has been an uptick in lapses, but nowhere near as bad as we expected. It's also, it's impacted our financial results as well in indirect ways. So we actually project out a lot of our cash flows and then have to discount it back to present day dollars, because we are a long-term business, and part of insurance is making sure that you've got your asset base and solvency to service the business, 50 years from now, a policy which is taken out now, can we still pay out those claims in the future? So because of COVID, there's been a big drop in interest rates, as most people are probably seeing with their mortgages and so forth. So as interest rates go down, the present value of those projections goes down, and that actually increases our profitability. So we've seen a lot of volatility with discount rates moving up and down, and now we're starting to see them go back up again. So it's going to continue to impact us going forward. The other big challenge that we've been facing this year is regulation. So we don't sell direct to consumers. We actually sell through an advisor network. And that is heavily regulated by the Financial Markets Authority. So they've been introducing a new, regulatory regime, which basically required all of our advisors to come under that new regime and be licensed under that new regime. And basically, if they weren't licensed by the deadline, then effectively they can't sell new business. And that has a potentially big profit impact for us. So we've been working really hard to make sure that all our advisors are licensed. Some will inevitably leave the market. So we've also been working to make sure that basically we don't end up with what we term orphan policies, so that we're able to move into someone who is licensed and they can continue to service those clients.
Do you see those trends actually sort of being maintained over the next 2 or 3 years, or there's some other things that might be on the horizon?
I think, yeah, regulation, it's always changing, and there's always reviews happening by the Reserve Bank and FMA. Prior to, I guess, this new licensing regime, there was a big conduct and culture review where they're looking at, I guess, the way insurers compensate advisors, because we are very dependent on advisors selling new business. And they wanted to make sure that basically the commission structures were fit for purpose, and we were getting good customer outcomes. So yeah, there's been a lot of changes there, and yeah, regulation will always move. So I'm sure that there's going to be something else coming up.
Yes, indeed. And we're quite pleased about that, actually, come to think that had a few issues, of course, well, most of us have. Okay, so thank you very much for everyone giving us a sort of context for your businesses and in fact for your roles. I want to turn to you, Simon. You're a very seasoned leader in very senior roles in a range of different kinds of companies. Certainly FMCG in the most, in quite a significant way. So I would imagine that this last year or so has been a really hard gig in terms of leadership. Most of you are seasoned leaders, and I'm interested to sort of talk about that basically, you know, in terms of how you've led teams and what have you. But Simon, just tell us a bit about your leadership journey over the last year or so, and how you think that's, you know, what have you seen that surprised you? What have you learnt about leading in these disrupted times?
Yeah, okay. I'm actually, funny enough, that the thing that comes to mind on that, there's a really neat connection to the question that Gaurav's put into the chat. So I might connect into that.
Yeah, please.
So if people have seen that question in the message chat there, you know, were there any challenges between supply chain and IT in your businesses during that NZ COVID peak time, sort of March to June last year? And if I'm assuming, Gaurav, what you kind of mean by challenges between is, you know, was there a bit of friction and tension between the two? I'll take it as if it's asking that, because yeah, interesting. There were huge shared challenges between supply chain and IT in our business, but there was a complete, you know, absence of friction and tension. You know, what the supply chain team needed most from us was stability. You know, just that they could rely on the fact that their systems would work day in, day out tirelessly, because everything else was going pretty haywire, right, in terms of the unpredictable demand and unpredictable supply and disruptions and shocks, etc. So they just needed that kind of core stability. So, you know, for example, it wouldn't have been practical to put some kind of change freeze in, because who knew how long it was going to go on for, and you've still got to be, you know, driving a few changes. But we kind of quickly adopted what we called a heightened awareness change protocol, just to sort of dial up the risk aversity a bit and ensure we could keep things stable. We helped, the supply chain IT sort of helped each other in terms of finding some creative ways to do some stuff which I guess was normal kind of stuff, like I don't know, changing parameters on some of the stock, some of the replenishment methods, or putting products into certain different types of stock profile, but doing it in a way that was maybe a sort of 1,000 times more intense than it might have been in a regular period. So having to kind of get creative on that. But all of that was done in a very kind of in it together teamwork way. And that's kind of that's the link back to your question here, because I think a key learning for me over the last year was it sort of reinforced something which I think we kind of knew already, which is actually leadership in a crisis is pretty easy. You know, as a leader, it is fairly straightforward, because when you've got a crisis going on, a lot of the other stuff that you kind of deal with day to day melts away, right? You can be, you know, pretty sure that everyone's going to be engaged. The objectives, the outcomes you're trying to achieve are narrowed down and clear, and that there is absolutely no lack of motivation. I think also through COVID, there's also the sort of the helpful element that it's broadly an external thing that's happening, and you're coming together as a team to really work to get the best possible, you know, result for your customers and for your business. So yeah, I think, you know, that's why you have things like absence of tension between supply chain and IT team, but it's also, you know, as a leader, you think, okay, it can be hard and draining through that period, but it's not tiring and draining, I should say, but it's not actually kind of difficult, because as long as you can make things clear for people, absolutely they're going to step up and do what needs to be done to kind of get the outcomes you need. So really the question from that is, well, how do we recreate that without the crisis or the existential threat, in a more sort of sustainable way? And so that's really what I've been putting a lot of sort of thought and work into, as things have steadied out. And yeah, I think it's sort of simplistic to say, well, why don't you just have a shorter list of priorities and then everyone would know what they're doing? Because while the kind of the COVID period lasted quite a long time, there were still some things during that extended period which we could just push aside and let go, but they were still going to come back at some point, right? We couldn't ignore them forever. So it's not sustainable to think we'll always operate with just, 3 clear priorities and then life will be good. We've got to find a sustainable way of, really working, I think, across functions and across the whole of business to properly understand the outcomes we're looking for, to embrace the fact that there's capacity constraints, there's resource constraints, there's financial constraints, and kind of work with those and within those to allocate those resources in the best possible way, as opposed to kind of wishing life were different and that there was elastic amounts of money and elastic amounts of people. And so either kidding ourselves that we don't have to prioritize, or kidding ourselves that if we declare the top 5 things, all the other stuff that our teams deal with will just melt away, because that isn't how real life works. So that's kind of what I've been kind of wrestling with a bit, really, is how to take the stuff we know kind of works in a crisis, but reset it to work in real life without kind of just taking a simplistic view that isn't going to kind of pan out so well.
Yeah, that's really cool. Very interesting, I have to say, Simon. And I'll ask that later. Deena, also you could have a little look at that question if you can see it, about the challenges between supply chain and IT in your business. And I mean, you sort of span both, don't you? Because you've had big people roles in the sort of operations part of the supply chain, and now in the sort of the automation and sort of getting more familiar with the IT. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, look, I listening to Simon's comments about the environment between the two parts of the business, I absolutely concur that the dependency between the two was at a heightened level of importance last year. In fact, we had even more of a reliance on the IS relationship because we transitioned people to home. We had to run an operational business from the kitchen bench or the bedroom desk. And that created a huge amount of risk from a security point of view, and also the stability of the systems we were using. We originally were on business Skype. That became enormous pressured environment because we had hundreds to 1,000 people dialing in for team meetings on those platforms. Get over to Teams, we said, Teams has got risk. And then we were like, no, don't use Zoom. So it was quite a disruptive time trying to maintain that connectedness with our teams right across the country. I think professionally, and a little bit of my personal insight across the year is we saw leaders stand up through those environments, both in how we adapted and how we saw people build really, really high resilience. Being able to manage the home environment alongside critical events. I know personally trying to manage a team of 700 operators, very similar to Simon's environment at work, we had to get essential workers to our place of work. Getting export containers packed, our customers globally placed a huge amount of reliance on their food continuing through supply chain. We had to not forget about the people, which is Barbara's point about the care and the empathy we needed to show around, are you okay? What's going on for you at home? Whilst also expecting people to perform effectively and roll from a very, very different environment. Whether it be the lack of bump meetings or the social contact at work, it was an incredibly dynamic environment. And there was certainly some key reflections I took away personally around being respectful of the boundaries we needed to create for people, you know, home life, schooling, parenting, pets, whilst also, you know, business continuity, which was a real reflection for me. It did come to play the development areas that we had invested heavily in. For example, we saw people really step up in those environments. We played out a lot of the critical thinking development exercises we had learnt in a theory sense, but got to actually play those out in a real environment. Our preparedness was really tested. So when people talk about, you know, preparing BCPs or business continuity plans on a piece of paper and getting those ready and refreshed and on time throughout a non-COVID year, those got us through. So if you're an organisation that, you know, rolls the eyes or cringes at the risk team coming to you saying, oh, you know, we've got to do the BCP again this quarter and check that we're ready, please do them, because that was one light bulb moment for me running the logistics team the way I did in that role. If we hadn't been prepared in a BCP sense, we wouldn't have been prepared. So, you know, please invest in that aspect of your organisation, whether it be the IS system or whether it's the operational continuity piece that got us through, both as a leader in my capacity, but also an organisation.
Just unmute myself. And you had quite a difficult time too, because your husband was actually in Melbourne, in Australia, for almost 9 months, isn't it? So in terms of families being separated and having to just keep focused on the business and what have you, that's a hard thing to have to deal with.
Yeah, look, I mean, that was a struggle for us, and we became incredibly good communicators, both in, you know, how's your day versus the wellness, mental health side, to make sure when you haven't got that support network at home, and the bookends of the day keep growing. I learnt that, you know, checking in with people and that, are you okay today? What can we do to support you? Became even more important, which I know will resonate with Barbara.
And continues to be. I think that's the thing. So Barbara, I will go to you, because you obviously had some challenges, as you've said, about being between Australia and New Zealand, but you talked about culture, and I think that's one of the things that we've been thinking about quite a lot and discussing amongst all of us. You know, there were some huge culture pieces that, as Simon said, you know, you could deal with when there's challenge, but actually what happens now, and you know, real issues around talent and what have you. So can you talk about that, both from your business perspective, but also as a really senior people leader, what you're seeing, you're observing?
You know, the last year's been so fascinating, and no one would ever say that you know, that it was perhaps a good thing. But from my perspective, from a people perspective, I've just loved seeing the rehumanisation of business over the last year. I think we lost track in the lead up to COVID of the fact that actually at the heart of every business, and I challenge you to give me one that doesn't have this, there are people. And that had been forgotten as we treated them as a resource. And actually they're people and they fuel our businesses. My personal value set and my philosophy is that if you can create an environment where people thrive, they do amazing things. And actually the last year created that environment. It also created an environment where people were very, very fearful and very scared at times. And so the things that Deena's spoken about were really important. The other point I want to make before I give you a bit more about, you know, the leadership challenges, I think Simon's comment's right about the fact that, you know, leadership teams were able to unite, you know, around a single purpose, and there was clarity, et cetera, et cetera. But what I would say is that if there was dysfunction going into that situation, it didn't help the fact that, you know, you now needed to unite. And so without a doubt, I saw leadership teams that were cohesive come out much stronger and able to take advantage of the environment and of the situation. And let's get real, that's a part of what we do in business, is we go, well, how do I maximize the opportunity from this situation that I'm now in? So for us, that was a fascinating challenge because, as I said, we've got 14 different businesses, each with a chief executive or an executive general manager, each with a very distinct culture. And we're a highly successful, very commercial set of businesses. when you are faced, I guess, with a challenge, as our managing director was nearly 3 years ago when he came in, around, well, how much do I standardise? How much do I seek to have unity in what it is that we do? How much do I let them just go? It's an interesting question faced with COVID, because 14 different businesses that you just let go looks like chaos to me. So I'm very grateful that we had embarked on what we call an approach of sovereignty with strength, and that is that the businesses are independent, sovereign businesses. Excuse me. However, there's strength in coming together, and there are certain elements that having a shared experience actually provides business benefit to you through. And so we ran our COVID response from a leadership perspective using the sovereignty with strength approach, which meant that we did come together regularly, but that the businesses needed to make the right calls for their businesses about what it was that they did. And we supported them from the centre as much as we can. Now, bear in mind that GUD Holdings, have got 13 people, 13. That's it. So I have no one working for me, and we've done that purposefully. We've created the working relationships. So each of the GMs have an HR GM. And that's where the relationship should be, in my view. So we were all about fueling and supporting them to ensure that not only were they doing what they needed to do defensively, but that offensively they were growing the leadership capability of their teams through this experience that we were having together. So, the rehumanisation, the opportunity to grow capability, to stretch those leadership teams through the experiences that they were having, and to provide them with support to make sure that we did look after all of the GUD people in a way that showed that, people were really valued, was really, really important to us. And actually it's allowed us to escalate a number of the things that, were on my we'll do that when the time is right list. We've gone, righto, that's created an opportunity. Let's lean into that one. Let's see how we can really exploit that.
That's so interesting, Barbara. And I've just written a little note. I want you to speak on the Strategic People Program about this very thing, about sort of, culture and dealing with change, but actually from a very human perspective, and actually what that does to release, sort of talent and, just people do you're right, people do amazing things.
It's powerful. We had a strategy day yesterday, and I had to be on the end of Teams, but in some ways it was a blessing, because I saw play out in front of me this huge uplift in capability of the business unit leads from what I saw 2 years ago. And I have no doubt that the leadership experience that they had through COVID is a part of that, without a doubt.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Barbara. That's really cool. And that, Jay, that comes to you because you told me the other day that you are actually a recovering bean counter. And that one of the things, I love that term, and one of the things that, you wanted to do the CFO program for, was to actually make that shift between being a technical leader to being a people leader. And you're in a business that actually, as Barbara said, some companies are sort of, so focused on the technical aspects that they kind of forget that people actually do these things. And I suppose I'm being unfair, but I have a feeling that sort of insurance companies potentially might, or even assurance companies, maybe a little like that. But can you talk, gross generalisation, I know. Can you talk a little bit just about your journey of learning that, as you've heard the others speak about the sort of leadership in those sorts of times, and what being a leader now feels to you, and how you focus on different things, particularly people leadership focus?
Yeah. Well, we talked about the other day that I guess when you're studying at uni, you kind of imagine your career journey being, as I work longer in a company or different companies, I will get better at my core role, and that's how I'll progress up the leadership ladder. And then you go into industry and you realize that actually the further up the career path you go, the less of the core day-to-day doing there is. And actually your role transforms into, I guess, in accounting, at least being a technical expert, to, I guess, being a people leader and manager and a project manager as well, because there's too much happening at any one time for you to really be able to run all of it. you're really facilitating a wider team or a wider organization to be able to achieve the firm's strategic goals. And I guess when you're at uni, you don't actually get taught any of that. You get taught how to do your core job, and the basics of accounting. So a lot of the learning is just learning on the job and moving to different companies and seeing how different leaders manage their stuff and what works well and what doesn't. But that's where the benefit of a course like this comes in, because actually you're taught some of these skills around peer coaching and presenting. And it's funny because even though, I do present to the board quite regularly, I guess the feedback that I get from the board or the CFO is generally around the content. It's never around, oh, you say a lot, or you move your hands, too much while you're speaking. And actually those are things that are pointed out to you in the course. And it's like, oh, I didn't even realize I did that. Actually, one of the best pieces of advice I got from a former manager was, she said, you know your stuff. Like when you're talking, you really know the technical detail, but you have a tendency to say kind of quite a lot. And as soon as you say kind of, that makes me lose confidence in what you're saying, because it makes it sound like actually you don't really know what you're saying, even though you do. And it's something I'd never really clicked to. And I remember doing the presenting module in the course, and basically that was a call out as well. And I was like, oh, I thought I'd gotten better at that, but I must still be saying it. So it's I'm a work in progress, but it's good to actually have that type of feedback, which sometimes you don't get within your own organization.
Fantastic. I think we're all works in progress, Jay, actually. Thanks for raising that. And Rohit, actually, who is doing the strategic people program, has asked a really great question, which I'll actually throw open to the panel. How does the foreseeable future look like in terms of technical and soft skills, transferable and new skills in any industry, and change an approach to talent management? So what are the kind of skills that we think are sort of, we're going to be needing in the future, more than necessarily sort of all the technical skills that we might have focused on?
I'll have a crack, Felicity.
Good on you, Simon. Thank you.
Yeah, you mentioned the history degree at the beginning, so every now and then I like to bring a bit of history into things.
Fantastic.
You go back through human history, and for almost all of it, people generally developed a skill, and it might not have even been one they'd chosen. It was one that was chosen for them, and then that's what they did, for their life, and that was kind of it. And then at some point, knowledge as well as practical skill started to become more important, and everyone developed knowledge, and that's what they did through their careers. But we're now at that place where knowledge isn't too hard to come by. You can look it up if you know what you're looking for, and this skills, the rate of change of technology in the broader sense, so not just kind of IT type technology, but technologies in the broader sense is changing so quickly that the chance of kind of having one skill and sticking with it are fairly slim. So kind of clearly the trajectory is towards the soft skills, the ability to to problem solve, to work together, to collaborate, to adapt, to all of that stuff is clearly becoming more important than it was. Now, whether there's some kind of tipping point in that and what that really means, I'm not going to pretend to be the expert, but that is the direction. So if you're looking to invest in one thing or the other in yourself, it's probably worth thinking about those sort of what might be considered soft skills, except they're really hard to do and they're really valuable, rather than some of the technical skills, while not undermining the importance and the value of those technical skills as well. Just sort of recognizing that if you can wrap some really good soft skills around a core of some technical skill, that makes you an extremely valuable resource. And if those soft skills include the ability to switch out those technical skills from time to time, then even more so. There's a starter.
Yeah.
I think Simon's spot on. I think it is definitely an and proposition. And I would add to that I think the most valuable skill and the essential one for the future is you've got to have self-awareness. And I think you've got to actually understand yourself enough to understand why you do what you do, and why you behave the way you do, why you are triggered in certain ways by certain situations or circumstances, and thus what you might do to expose yourself to more of those, to learn, or how you might react in those environments. So, you know, I work with several subgroups across the businesses around different subjects, and one of those subgroups actually, when we would meet, we would often talk about how we were feeling, you know, and there was this depth of self-awareness which became normal. And so, to paint a further picture for you, we're a pretty male-dominated industry, and so, you know, I've got, you know, 45 and 50-year-old males that will actually talk about how they're feeling easily now versus a year ago, where they sort of would have looked at you like you've really lost the plot, which is entirely possible. So I think some self-awareness is a really essential skill as well.
And Deena, we've speaking to a couple of the people that you're putting on the program this morning, and I think that was, you know, self-awareness came up there as well, but other things about I mean, Fonterra is big enough to have some very good, you know, development for people, and it looks like you've actually had a lot of thought put into, okay, who needs what kind of development. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, one of the key conversations we have in our organisation is the future of work. So we're becoming highly in tune with not just the skill we need today, but what does it look like in either a digital automated environment next year, 5 years, 10 years.
Awesome.
We're very fortunate in the organisation to be able to tap into an enormous amount of resource, whether that be skill, tools, programs of work. But we are very aware that there is a point where you can get to develop people up to a role, and there's enormous environmental support to help with that, but there's also an importance of what we call buying in key talent. Now that right now is heavily challenged by COVID and our borders being closed, because we like to complement the global aspect of people's experiences offshore and also organisations they've worked in, so that we can actually open our mind to different ways of doing things. So our investment right now is heavily focused on our existing workforce and how we actually lift them to the next level. And automation and technology is at the forefront of that.
That's fantastic. In the last few minutes, like all of you are very dedicated advisory group members or alum, and put a lot of energy and effort into working with us on the C-suite programs and, you know, sort of other parts of the sort of the UAB's business school, that is. I just wanted to ask you, like, why do you do that? Like, why do you put people on programs? And Deena, you don't have to answer that because you've already just said. But what is important about these programs, the way that we run these programs, that actually you're prepared to put the amount of energy and effort into bringing people on, being with us as we're designing these programs. Jay, you've experienced some things coming through in the last, you know, sort of since you've done the program or through it. What's important about these things?
In terms of the modules, I guess, yeah, as I touched on before, I guess you can't do everything. So you need to have a team who can be empowered to do things themselves. And I touched on before the peer coaching session, which generally when I used to coach my team, it used to be trying to find the solutions to their problems. And that takes a lot of your time, but it also takes a lot of your energy. And what we learned in the peer coaching session is around structuring those conversations that you're leading people down a path of a series of questions so that they're unearthing what the solution is to their problems. And I guess once you develop that skill set and are able to, I guess, train your team on being able to find their own solutions, then they're coming to you less and less, and you actually find there aren't as many problems because they've already troubleshooted it before it becomes a problem. So then that frees up more of your time. One of my challenges was always around becoming more strategic because I was so bogged down in the day-to-day of you know, everyday life of being a head of finance. So it's empowering your team to troubleshoot that, so you can create that time to then work on the next thing, and that builds your profile and allows you to take that next step. So yeah, it's helping me on that journey, but it's also helping my own team on their journey as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jay. I realised that actually Warwick identified a question that I haven't touched on. Are there any impediments or skills that the panel members thought were important that they now realise weren't prerequisites to their executive positions? Everybody looks up.
It's probably lacking the self-awareness to have worked it out yet. Answer my own question. I don't know whether this is exactly an answer to that, but you know, I'm not a technology person. I've worked a long time now in that kind of sort of technology related roles, but you know, the education background gives me away. It's not what I kind of grew up with. So I'm not sure it was ever a case of me thinking, that's an impediment and it won't work out, but it probably is an example of people might assume that you've got to have the deep expertise in the functional space that you're becoming the sort of executive leader on, and that's not necessarily the case. You know, those sort of leadership skills, I think, are broadly transferable and applicable across a range of leadership roles, and of course there's an element of domain expertise that you've got to have, and to be sometimes the translator between the real technical detail and the kind of the business and human logic, but don't let that be an impediment, I think, to kind of developing that into those leadership roles.
Fantastic. Deena, just a last word on that, for yourself.
Oh, look, it is a bit of a tongue twister, actually. I think what you do find out through those environments is the skills that you've developed that really come to the forefront of getting you through. I would say, one that stands out for me is resilience. You know, I mean, it's a skill you develop over time, and we all have different degrees of it. So I think that would be, I underestimated that in our environment of how critical that was, but also didn't truly understand the degrees of resilience within the team fully, and how we were all coping differently in different environments. Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Okay, I would love to continue this conversation, but as it's 1:58, that's it. We will take this up actually in the programs. I would really like to thank you for your honesty and openness to answering questions and to be reflective on the various things that we've asked today, and we've talked to all of it. There's Mabel.
Apologies, that's my dog.
I love that. That's been one of the really great things about COVID, is you get to meet people's dogs and families and this and the other thing.
And Simon's love of Rolling Stones, by the look.
Yeah, definitely.
It's the rehumanisation thing again, right? We're all people. There are multiple dimensions to us.
Exactly. It's fantastic. And Simon, I do want to talk to you more about history, because that's probably one of the things that we could all learn from a lot more. History. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, panel members. You've been awesome. Thank you, Jay, for your insights as to the sort of difference between sort of technical leadership and to leading across the organisation. And for everybody who's already on the program from in the audience, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at the end of June. If anybody else is interested in talking to us about the C-suite programs, then please do get in touch with us. And we'll continue these conversations, no doubt, over the next 6 months or whatever, as we all progress in the COVID era. Anyway, thank you very much, everyone, and have a fantastic rest of the day and a great weekend. Thank you.
Felicity.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.